Thank you, and thank you to those who actually stayed, because I know quite a few left already, and I don't blame them because this is late, so I'm gonna do my utmost to keep you all happy and awake and hopefully enjoying yourself and having a good time. The title of my talk is chosen because it's a bit provocative, because there will be organizations that will tell you that the UX is the responsibility of the UX'er. And it is, but not solely. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, why that is. Before we get to that, you should probably know this by now, but I'm going to throw it up there anyways. If you haven't learned by now, you probably won't learn. But please engage, rate the session, and above all, ask questions. I would be happy to take questions at the end of my talk. Just a bit about me, so you know who is up here yabbering. I am a software engineer. I graduated in 2003 from Aalborg University. I then went on to become a researcher at that same university. And I actually managed so well there that they offered me a PhD scholarship. That PhD scholarship was within HCI, as it was called at the time. HCI is short for Human Computer Interaction, and was probably that time's term for UX. UX is a newer term, but it more or less covers the same. That PhD I did and finished in 2009. I then went on to become a researcher again, and in 2010 I decided that now I spent 8 years becoming good at this field, maybe I should get out into the real world and find out if this actually holds any water. Or if this is just something we have invented in a dusty university office somewhere. Luckily, that turned out not to be the case. I came to Trifork in January 2011, and was really happy to find out that by far most of what I had spent my time getting good at was really useful in the real world. And as Christian said, I was up until very recently, actually until Wednesday last week, I was part of Trifork. Thursday I started at Lego, so don't ask me how that is, because I don't know yet. That's brand new. But before then I had promised I would come and give this keynote, and I would of course not miss this for the world, so I was happy that I was allowed to go, even though I'm not with Trifork anymore. I would also like to know a bit about who I'm speaking to. So, show of hands, how many in this room are developers? Yeah, that was to be expected. This is a developer conference after all. But I would also like to know if there is any who are responsible for the business side of things, such as project managers or leadership or that sort of thing. Show of hands. All right, that's quite a few. Anyone in here work within marketing in their business? A couple, not many. Anyone within UX or visual design? A few more. All right. So there are a bit of everything in here, but there's first and foremost developers, as was to be expected. All right. In my 5 years in Trifork, we have had quite a few clients come in, and then when we were talking about a new project, then they would talk to me about the roles of the project and the scope of the project and all of these initial things. And often I would hear sentences such as, the designer should focus on this and this, and we need to include the designer in this and this. And I would usually then at some point stop them and say, so you need an interaction designer or a visual designer? Because they would just say designer, and designer is a pretty broad term. And in some cases, I would get this response. And that's where I got worried, because there's a quite big difference. And this would be me then. Because then I know that there is something that we need to teach them before we start this project. Because if they don't know that there's a difference between an interaction designer and a visual designer, then they also don't know what each of those roles can contribute to a project, and they don't know what their responsibilities will be. So we need to figure that out. But honestly, I don't really blame them for not knowing the difference, because if you look at LinkedIn, I just did a random browse on LinkedIn. If you look at LinkedIn, you can quickly find any kind of these titles. And I'm quite sure that, oh, well, show of hands, I won't test you on it, but show of hands, how many of you know the difference between all of these titles? Okay, not many hands. I didn't expect it. I actually went as far as to make a title generator. Because you can basically do that. You just choose your level of seniority, and then you choose your topic, and then you choose your role in the project. And you can more or less combine all of these. And you can probably also find them out there. And the thing is, if we don't know that, I don't expect you to know it. You are developers, you're not in the UX field. The thing is, UXers don't even know it. UXers don't even know the specificities in all of the differences between these titles. And if they don't know it, you can't blame the developers for not knowing, you can't blame your customers for not knowing. Okay, so what's the problem in not knowing what a title is for? Well, if you don't know what the title is for, then you also don't know what specific part of the UX field that they belong in and what they're responsible for. And this talk is about responsibility of UX. Because this is how all of these fields are related. And I don't expect you to memorize that, and I won't test you on it later on. But as you can see, there's quite a lot of different areas that you can specialize in. One of the big chunks is interaction design. Another big chunk is visual design. Then there's the architecture and informatics. Those are probably the biggest ones. But there's also cognitive science, psychology, and all sorts of niche areas that you can specialize in. But as you also might have noticed, UX is not up there. Why is that? That's because UX actually encompasses far the most of this. That's UX. The problem with that, and the problem with the term UX'er, is UX is short for user experience. So I am a user experiencer. What does a person like that do? I don't experience the user, so that doesn't make sense. So you can't talk about the title UX'er. That doesn't make sense, but everybody does it nonetheless. And the problem with UX being such a broad field is that you cannot have one person be responsible for all of that. That's not possible. That would be a generalist, and they wouldn't be very good at either of those trades. My problem with this, all of this, is that what happens then when we have clients come in is that they found out this UX, that's the new black, that's the thing that we should all include in our projects. They don't really know what we do or what we're responsible for, but we should somehow rubber stamp the project. So that makes me feel a little bit like that. Basically, I'm this kind of little fairy that they will just shake on top of their project, and then everything that was ever wrong in that project should just magically disappear. Fairy dust. We all need some more of that. Except it doesn't exist. And the backside of that picture is that what they're often looking for is that when that doesn't happen, because I can tell you right now, it doesn't happen. I can't magically make all sorts of mistakes disappear if I come in at the very last stage of a project and is expected to come save the world. It doesn't work like that. And the backside to that picture is that what they're really looking for is that one. The scapegoat. The person to point to once we do launch this project out into the world, and they find out that was not what the users wanted, and they can't use it, and they are having a really hard time. Then they will point to me or whoever's in charge of UX and say, you didn't do your job right, because they can't use it. This is not user-friendly. This is not a good experience. That's a problem. I don't like to be put in that position. But why does it happen then? Why do they bring us in so late? Why do they blame us for whatever there is wrong with the product? Well, there's a number of pitfalls that happens when you introduce UX into an organization. First one is too little. Everybody wants a user-friendly product. Everybody wants good user experience. user experience, good user experience, is not for free. It costs money. It takes a chunk out of the budget. And usually people aren't really aware of that, or if they aren't really willing to give the appropriate chunk of the budget for it. And just like everybody in this room is really good at what they do and should be valued accordingly, most UX teams I know who really are passionate about what they do are really good at it as well, and they should also be awarded. So of course they need a budget, otherwise they can't function. And the other one is too late. Like I said, the fairy dust. Bring us in right at the end, and then hope we can come and save the day. That doesn't happen. We need to be there right at the beginning. Otherwise it doesn't work. But there's more than too little and too late. There's also too detached. There are a lot of companies who has a UX team that will be sitting somewhere centralized, and then they expect the developers to cross 3 buildings to come see them about some topic. Thing is, that doesn't happen. Then they'll just solve it on their own. The UXers need to be decentralized. They need to be in the teams, and they need to be there on a day-to-day basis, knowing what's going on, what are the problems we're facing, what are the exact things that are being developed right now, and what are the problems we have with that. Otherwise they can't help. They need to be an available resource, and they are not if they're detached and if they're too far away from where it's all going on. This one we've already covered a bit. It's too defocused. This whole UX thing is a very fluffy term, and since I just showed you all of the titles that nobody knows what do, and all of the different disciplines that nobody know how belong together, well, how can you be focused on exactly what a UX team should consist of, which roles, what should they be responsible for, when should they be entered into the project? You can't do that if you don't know all of these things before. And then finally, and that has happened a lot, there aren't that many UXers that have a lot of experience. So as the demand rises, people will bring in a rookie UXer that has just come out of university. Nothing wrong with that, I've been there. But they do not have the experience, and especially not if they're being plunked straight into a project too late in the process, alone, and expected to save the world. They're set up for failure. They can't do that. Alright, so what is it? Why, if we had all of this solved, what would then the ideal UX process be? What would be going on? Well, all of these titles, like I said before, they actually do have specific responsibilities. Not many people know what the difference is between them, but they actually do have specific responsibilities. If you want to take a look at this list, then I could be making that a lot longer. But that list is just some of the activities that will take place in a big UX team in a big organization. And many of these activities will be by specialists of the titles we saw before. So, field research, actually going out and meeting the users in their everyday life, at their workplace, find out what their pain points is and so on. Face-to-face interviewing, find out what is their problem, what is that they would like to achieve in their everyday life. Creation of user tests, testing existing software before we develop a new version, testing paper prototypes, testing functioning prototypes, benchmark testing the end result software, gathering and organizing statistics. If we have existing software where we're building a new version, we probably have statistics. We want to look into those and find out what we can learn before we start making new stuff. Creating personas, making detailed views of who is your user, not just my mom, because your mom isn't the user of every piece of software in the world, so it's not really fair to put her into account for that. Product design, feature writing, writing for the web, writing for an app, it's not just something that you sit down and do. It's actually difficult to be clear and concise in every communication you make in a piece of software. Requirement writing, graphic art, animations. Animators are some of the most specialized people I know. And the good ones are really good. But they don't have to do all the rest of what's on that list. They focus on animation. So, I'm not saying every single thing here should go on in a UX process, but these are some of the activities that might be relevant in a UX process. And which ones in which process depends on your project and what you need. But to think that one person can cover all of that, that solution. The problem why all of this that I talked about before happens is that there is a focus on just these two. A lot of people will mention these two and say that's UX to you. It is, because that's the deliverable. That's what comes out of all of the other activities. And that's why that's focused on, because you don't deliver something tangible out of the rest of them. But they need to go into those two for them to be really good. You do not get a good interface layout unless you have done all of your homework first. You do not get a good interface design unless you've done all of your homework first. So that's what goes wrong. People are not aware of the first list, they're just aware of these two and say, how hard can it be? We will just get one person to do that. No. Alright, so this is the UX process. These are the people that go into the UX team. But how do they then fit into the organization? UX is not a bubble. UX is not this sacred thing that you do not encroach upon. UX is in the tension field between a lot of other interests in an organization. The users have some needs and wants for a new piece of software, but that might not align with the business goals. The business goals, some of that will probably overlap, hopefully, but the business goals might be different. And then, on top of that, every project has a budget and a deadline, and then you have to look at what is technologically possible within that project. And that might also not be overlapping completely with the two others. So the idea of UX is not a bubble. UX is a compromise, and it's the compromise between the needs of the users, the goals of the business, and the technologically feasible in a project. And that requires you to take a lot of battles to make those three ends meet. And just to give you a few examples of, no, actually, rewind that will come later. The examples come later. This one, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How many of you have seen this before? Yeah, I expected that. It's a fairly known one. And bottom line is that as long for a human being, as long as the lower basic needs, the two lower layers, are not met, that human being will not focus on the three upper layers. It is important before anything else that you have food, water, warmth, and rest, and secondary, that you feel secure and safe. Once that is in place and stable, then you start looking at belongingness and love needs, such as intimate relationship and friends, and also the prestige and feeling of accomplishment. And only once that's in place, you start actually realizing yourself. So that's just the basic concept of this one. Of course, we all know that unless we have Wi-Fi, then all else fails. That one needs to go before. If we don't have that, then screw warmth and food. Alright, so what if Maslow had been a user? What would the hierarchy of user needs be? Well, it could look something like this. The bottom layer is data and content. Unless we actually have something to show the user that they need, then all else doesn't matter. Then it doesn't matter to have a fancy interface, it doesn't matter that the navigation is good, it doesn't matter that there's a lot of functionality. If we do not have the content to back it up, it doesn't matter. So that's the basic need. But data and content is something that we have in overflow these days. And to just throw all the raw data at the user, they will drown. So we need to filter it, we need to massage it, we need to choose carefully which parts of that content and data to show the user and when. And we do that by choosing the right functionality. Not too much, not too little, the right amount of functionality in an app. Alright, so now we've chosen what we're showing them. Now we need to choose how to show it to them. So, how should they interact with it? The functionality is there, but you could realize that in 100 different ways. We need to decide how to make the interaction design work. And once that's in place, that's when we start making it look good. And we put the graphics on top. And as you can see, none of this says UX. And the reason for this is because all of this is UX. All of this is UX. The reason for this is that if we don't have the data, or we have faulty data, that gives a poor user experience. If the functionality that we have chosen for the user is too little or too much, that gives a poor user experience as well. If they can't navigate it, poor user experience. And if it looks bad, that's also going to affect the user experience. So all of this affects the user experience. It's the totality of it. But as I showed you before, there's a lot of stakeholders in this, and they don't always agree on what should be realized and when and how. So project managers, they have their needs. Marketing, they have theirs. Legal department, they also have a say. The visual designers, some CXOs that have a pet peeve of some sort. Developers have a saying as well. Security wants something as well. All of these need to come into the UX. Otherwise, this won't work. And just to give you a few examples of what these different interests of these stakeholders could be, then one of these is, this one is one of my favorites. Form fields. We all see them everywhere, we all hate them. Because there's always tons of fields to fill out. And there seemed to be a general rule. Not so much anymore, it's getting better, but it was really bad at some point. That because we can, we will collect data. I completely understand the reasoning behind it, that a company, an organization want to know as much about their users as they can. If we put the white hat on, it's because then they can deliver better services. If we put the black hat on, it's because that gives you information to sell. But I'm fairly sure that that should be a really, really good prize in that competition for me to give up all of that information. Because that's the thing. Users have become smart over the years. They know that information is money. So if they know that you are asking things that you don't need to deliver that service that you are claiming you will deliver, they know you're over asking. And then they will think quid pro quo and say, okay, am I getting enough for this? And what will happen is if they still want what you're selling, but they don't think you deserve all of that information, then they will start filling it out wrong. Then they will put 1st of January 1995 as their birthday, and they will put in Mickey Mouse as their name and some fictitious address. And the only thing that's worse for you to have than not having data is faulty data, because that makes you take wrong decisions. So don't over ask. But this is one of the classical ones that a project manager might come up with, and that the UXer then has to fight and saying that's not really in the interest of the user, that's maybe in the interest of the organization, but it's not going to fly because you're not going to get what you want. Another one is something like this. That could be the project manager. It could also be marketing that will try to push upon the user without the user noticing something that the user doesn't want. And the user will find out. I had a fun experience with this one. I had a friend, he is a great guy, but he does not know anything about computers. He called me up in panic one day. Janne, Google has gone missing. I said, damn, Google is big. That's some achievement to have that gone missing. What had happened was that he had updated Java, and he had not seen that. And then not only did he get the toolbar, but it was also his primary search provider. So his front screen on his opening screen on his browser that used to be Google was now the Ask toolbar. And he did not know what to do about it. He did not even know what had happened or when it had happened. So I had to go through with him, finding the program, uninstalling, finding Google again, getting that to be the default, blah, blah, blah. It worked. But the thing is, this could be marketing doing that in your organization. You have a primary product that everybody wants. Now you have this new product that you would like to give like a really good lift off. And you do so by bundling it with what people really want and then stuffing it down their throat when they're not looking. Don't think that they don't realize that's what's going on. They will. And they will get really mad at you for doing so. This is not really good for Oracle to be the anchorman of this. That it digs into your trust as a company. If you do something like that, people are going to think twice about saying yes to some of your products another time, because they never know what they'll get away with in the end. This one could also be a marketing one. I am a fan of NFL. I play NFL Fantasy. And on NFL's website, when you are logged into your fantasy league, and you are in the game center, and you are looking at your team and the team that you're opposing that week, then right in the middle of you checking out all of your players and who is meeting who this week and so on, a video will start playing. And not without sound. So basically, that's when you scramble for your mute button because you're in the middle of a meeting and you're actually on a website you shouldn't be on, and so on and so forth, right? We've all been there. Don't tell me you haven't. So either you scramble for your mute button, going bright red because you know you're doing something you shouldn't at the moment, or you are swearing because you jumped out of your seat because you weren't prepared for that sound to come out of the speakers, especially if they turned up. You can get really scared. But that's also a marketing thing, because they will say, oh, but it should start auto-playing, because then we know the user will see it, and we know that they will know we have a new product out. Yeah, and they're going to hate you for it. And they are going to actively avoid that product because it scared them shitless the first place. All right, legal. Another one of my favorites. Privacy policies, terms and conditions, all of these fancy words that has to be in there somewhere. There was an English company, they did a very unscientific small study where they had put up a Wi-Fi hotspot with some terms and conditions that people had to sign on to use the Wi-Fi. And 6 out of 6 people in that study had then signed away the right to their firstborn. People don't read it. And here's the thing. The I agree button, it's deactivated because somebody found out that people aren't reading these, and they really should be, because they should know what they're agreeing to. So let's make them scroll down for the I agree button to go active. Yeah, because that's going to make them read. No, it's not. And as if checking one box wasn't enough, why? See, that's the thing. As a UX'er, which I'm not, but as a UX'er, I'm responsible for that. No, legal is responsible for that, and also the effect it has on the user experience. That's what I mean when I say that everybody's responsible for UX, because when you make a decision in a product, whether it's legal or marketing or project managers or whatever, you have to be aware that that will affect the user experience, and you have to think to yourself, am I doing this in my own selfish interest, or am I doing that in the interest of the user? If you're lucky, there will be a win-win, and it's the interest of both. If you're not, then try, if it is a must-win battle in your organization, try and make it the least cumbersome for the user as you can. Visual designers, because I'm getting all around, I'm hammering all of you here. Visual designers, they love the bling. They love the aesthetics. The thing is, sometimes that will become too important to them, and that will supersede the usability. This is a weather app called Haze. I know the people who made them. They're nice people, but they're also very graphically minded, and they wanted to make the ultimate aesthetically pleasing app, and I think they did. The problem was that the user experience suffered in the process, because the navigation of that one is horrendous, and it takes a very long time to figure out how everything works. On top of that, they have, in order to make it aesthetically pleasing, they have actually delivered less than minimum viable product, because there wasn't enough functionality for that to be an actual replacement for any weather app I'm normally using. There are some key features missing in there. And the thing is, it's not because they didn't have time to develop these features, because they used plenty of time to develop themes of all sorts for the app. Themes that gradually become available as you browse around the app, and then it becomes available as you go into settings or as you go into something else. So it's not that they didn't have the time or the budget to actually make the features, they just chose to focus on something else. Graphics. Again, compromising the user experience. I mentioned that CXOs might sometimes have a pet peeve. And I have had clients, not only CXOs, but clients in general, coming in and saying, oh, but we should have QR codes. Said no user ever. Because that's approximately right. People don't use those. And the reason that they don't use those is because they are often used wrong in whatever software you're developing. They're used instead of a very easy to remember URL that you might as well type into your browser. Now you put it on a QR code that then makes the user have to download an extra app that can actually scan that code to make it go into your URL. Which doesn't make any sense. There are cases where QR codes will make sense, but in most cases, it's just instead of a URL that you could make that would be easily rememberable, and then you wouldn't have that problem. All right, and now comes to the majority of you, developers. Content. As I said before, in the user needs triangle, that's the basis. We need the content, otherwise it's not interesting. And very often, I have developers saying, oh, but we can't get that data. That's not available to us. And in many cases, they're right. In some cases, they're also just lazy. And I'll look at them and say, we can't get it, or we can't be bothered to get it. And then push them a little bit. Because we need that. If we can't get the data, if we can't get what the user came there for originally, then it doesn't matter. So we have to make that extra effort. I'm perfectly aware that sometimes that means extra hours, and then we have to look at a budget to find out if they're actually there. But since we're looking at the very basis of the software we're developing, I should think that there should be some budget for that. Performance. So many of you have had apps that then when you opened them, then they weren't responsive enough and you deleted them and you never look back. That happens to users as well. That's not just developers. You users as well. It happens so often that people lose their temper with a piece of software because it's just too slow. Just a rule of thumb, 0.1 second is the maximum delay that a user won't notice. 1 second is the maximum delay that a user will notice, but without losing their train of thought, without actually breaking their rhythm of what they're doing. 10 seconds is the limit that people will not accept and will leave. Abandon your software. So, I can make the best interface in the world, but if the performance is poor, people aren't going to use it. So developers are also responsible for the UX, because that definitely affects the user experience. That one, less is more, typical Apple product. Really, really minimalistic, can do one thing and do it really great. Google, fantastic. Searches, that's all it does, but it does it really well. And then there's that one. The one where it just ran off with the developers because, oh, but we can do this as well, and it's really clever and really smart, and then I can get to use this new technology. Yeah, but is it something that the user want? Maybe not. So sometimes less is more. Oftentimes less is more. And yes, it might be smart, but just because we can do it doesn't mean we should. Security. That's a specific kind of developers, typically, but it's still one of my pet peeves. How many of you fight with this? Yeah, we all do. Because even though, how many of you in here are security people? Okay, there's actually a few brave enough to put up their hand. I like it. See, the thing is, even security people will fight with this. Nevertheless, they insist it should be there. And it doesn't make much sense because cognitively, human beings aren't able to do that. They aren't able to remember random passwords, especially not to the amount that we actually need today. And nevertheless, we ask it of them. You would look at me funny if I, in all seriousness, looked at you and said, please run 100 miles per hour. I say, I can't do that. No? Well, go ahead, do it. That's a requirement. But I can't. No. Users can't do that either. Nevertheless, we require it of them. Cognitively, they are not capable of doing that. It's a hard limitation. Nevertheless, we ask it of them. There was some research done where some people within UX were looking into how can we ease this pain, but without compromising security, because it's not like I don't understand the necessity of security. Of course I do. But first of all, this is designed to avoid people breaking other people's passwords. But that's not usually who does it. It's machines. And the only thing that affects the strength of a password, if it's machines breaking them, is brute force, thus the length of the password. It doesn't matter if it's special characters or capital letters or number. That doesn't matter. It's the length that matters. And most people have some. It's not completely random passwords that people use. People have like concatenated words and then like a number at the end or at the beginning or something like that. And there was some research done where they actually extended the length of the password, and then they let the user choose 2 characters in that password to be shown. So if we're doing this whole concatenated word thing, then they would show the first letter in the second word and maybe the first of the ending numbers. That would greatly improve people's ability to actually remember that password and limit it to, the subset of passwords that it might be, but without actually getting in conflict with the security, because the password was just that much longer, so there were still 8 unknown characters, but now there were also 2 known ones. So it is possible to join security and UX if you think a little about it, rather than just insisting that it just has to be this way. All right, so UX is the UX's responsibility. I think we've established that that's not the case. I think we've also established that UX is not a bubble. It exists within all sorts of restrictions. Do we have the right data? If we don't, that affects the UX. Do we have enough of a budget? If we don't, that affects the UX. Do we have the right technology? If not, yeah. The business, is it putting an emphasis on this? Or are their interests different from the users, and are they insisting on that? Security, are they actually listening when we say this is difficult for users? The deadline, is that making it impossible to make something good? Marketing, are they having their own pet peeves that they want to push in front and insist on? Then that affects it as well. And graphical design, if they insist on it being bling and aesthetically pleasing, and that's above everything else, that certainly affects the UX as well. So as you can see, UX lives a hard life in the middle of everything. And that's why we need your help, because we can't do it alone. UX is a team effort. UX is not the UX's responsibility. That's all I had. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a few questions here. So there's one question saying, can UX tests be automated?
Can UX tests be automated?
Or do you even test it?
Yes, I do test it. You can test it at any kind of level in the process. You can test it on a paper prototype, you can test a functioning prototype, you can test the end product. You can basically test it in all phases of a development process. So definitely you can test it. Can it be automated? I highly doubt it. But you can save, because I know this question probably comes out of a worry with budget, because it is expensive to run tests. You can do something that's semi-automated, because you can do remote usability testing that's asynchronous, where you use a piece of software within which your piece of software will run. And then in that framework, you will have questions and tasks that the user should answer and solve, and they will report back. And then the only kind of expense you have is a symbolic payment to the users that are helping you, and any kind of payment for the piece of software that you're using. So you can significantly save money on the test part of UX by doing remote usability testing in an asynchronous and semi-automated way. Of course, there has to be someone in the other end looking at everything that's coming in and then transforming that into some recommendations. That you can't avoid, but I think that's as much as you can automate it.
Okay, there's one more. So you're bashing this accept these legal terms kinds of situation, and the question is, how do you solve that? Accept these legal terms from a UX perspective?
Well, I just like security, because I know the necessity of good security. I also know the necessity of having, well, to say it bluntly, your ass covered, because that's what it's about. I know the necessity of that, especially if you're in some markets where you can get easily sued over, well, everything. But you can do it in a very unintrusive manner, such as the list of I consent that blah blah blah, and there was like 12 of them. Why not just put one and saying I accept terms and conditions? Why do you make people scroll for the agree button to go become active? I mean, it has to be there, I know that. But you can easily do it by saying that, hey, if you Facebook does it. If you once you sign up, if you say yes to the terms and conditions, the fact that you keep using their software means that you actively have accepted the terms and conditions. It's not even like you have to accept every time. Only if they actually change the terms and conditions. But otherwise, the fact that you use their software means you accept their terms and conditions. That's very unintrusive. Doesn't mean that they are any less covered. So it's not about saying, okay, then we just shouldn't have any kind of legal coverage at all. Of course we should, but let's not rub it in the face of the user. Let's not make that the primary functionality of the app.
Okay, thank you. So there's another question here saying, do you have any advice for a developer who cares about UX, but who finds himself building suboptimal user experiences due to time pressure?
Oh, that's a good question. And whoever asked that, I really feel for you, because that's not a fun position to be in. That's a difficult one. I would start by trying to make people more aware of this field. His co-workers, his manager, maybe leadership, by showing them videos of some good talks that are out there, by maybe inviting in a speaker that knows what they're talking about. Because it might not be a lack of interest, they might just not be aware of this field existing and the importance of it. And that would be maybe a first step to make people aware. Secondly, once they're aware, it's going to be a bit hard to ignore once you actively start pushing and saying, we should really consider this because such and such and so and so. And if he's not getting anywhere with it, and that's a huge pain point for him, then perhaps look for a place where they actually value it some more, where they see the importance of it. Because luckily more and more places are actually valuing good UX today.
Okay, there's a last question, but it's actually more of a pun on the GOTO organization. They're asking, how do you evaluate the UX of this? And the questionnaire you have to fill out.
That's great.
No,
I think I'm just not going to comment on that.
No, you don't have to come. I think we'll just say thank you. Thanks for
All
coming.
Right. Thank you.